He carried the weight of a nation's pain in silence, until now. This haunting true story of love, loss, and unyielding resistance will stay with you long after the final word. If it moved you, hit like, leave a comment, and subscribe, because stories like this deserve to be remembered, shared, and never forgotten. Let's keep the voices of the past alive. The old man sat on the porch, the wood beneath him creaking like the bones in his knees, the humid southern air thick with the scent of magnolia and memory. His hands, gnarled and spotted with age, held a chipped glass of sweet tea that had long since gone warm, untouched. Across from him, his grandson sat silent, eyes wide, notebook open but pen unmoving. The cicadas buzzed, a low, electric hum that filled the spaces where words had not yet dared to settle. "You old enough now," the man said, voice like gravel dragged through molasses, "to know where you come from." His gaze drifted toward the distant fields, golden in the late afternoon sun, and the past came like a storm cloud, slow, dark, inevitable. His name was Elijah Thompson, and in 1962 he was 23, working in a small Mississippi town no one remembered, with streets that bled dust and signs that read, "Whites only," like they were commandments from heaven. He'd come with nothing but a worn satchel, and a conviction that trembled but did not break. He worked with the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, canvassing neighborhoods that had learned to whisper their dreams, teaching folks to read so they could register to vote, dodging the eyes that watched from behind curtains and gun barrels. He remembered the night they burned Mrs. Carter's house, a widow who had dared to stand in line at the county courthouse. The flames licked the sky as she screamed, not for her home, but for the family Bible she'd kept since 1911. He ran into that fire, skin blistering, lungs screaming, and emerged with the charred book pressed to his chest like salvation. They called it bravery. He called it guilt. He remembered the names. Curtis Bell, hanged from a tree after being seen talking to a white girl at the corner store. Angela Marks, who vanished one night and was never found, her name whispered like a prayer and a curse. And Reverend Daniels, his mentor, his brother in arms, shot dead on the church steps with his sermon notes fluttering like wounded doves around his body. Elijah had watched the blood mix with holy water. He spoke now, slowly, like every word he pulled up from inside him had to pass through decades of rusted doors. "I saw things no man should see," he said, voice catching like a chain on a broken bike. "Did things I ain't proud of. But I fought. I fought the only way I knew how, with words, with marches, with silence when silence was safer." He told of the time he and 3 others sat at a diner counter, unmoving as the waitress poured hot coffee on their laps, as men behind them spat and muttered slurs like venomous prayers. He didn't move. He didn't cry. He stared at the wall and counted the cracks until it was over. He told of the night he was dragged from his bed, hooded men surrounding him, ropes in hand. They beat him near to death, left him in the swamp, bones fractured, spirit splintered. It was a black nurse named Lila who found him, patched him up with trembling hands and humming hymns. He would never see her again. She disappeared weeks later, her house ransacked, her name erased from every whisper. His voice broke when he spoke of Samuel, his best friend, who took a bullet meant for him on the courthouse steps. Elijah had looked into his friend's eyes as the light fled, holding him, whispering promises he couldn't keep. "We're gonna make it, Sam. We gonna make it." But Sam died, and Elijah buried him with a stone that read nothing because the county wouldn't allow it. And still he marched. Still he stood. He told his grandson of the day the Voting Rights Act passed, how the streets exploded with tears and song, how he held the hand of a woman who had never before signed her own name and watched her write it slow, trembling, but proud. "It felt like winning," he said, "but the war wasn't over. It just changed clothes." The years after were quieter but no less cruel. He took a job as a janitor, disappeared into the world like a ghost, because the rage inside him had turned to ash, and he didn't know how to speak anymore. He never married. couldn't. Not after the things he'd seen. But when his daughter brought home a baby boy, his blood, his name, something inside him stirred. And now, all these years later, he sat on the porch and spoke to that boy, because silence had become a prison. "You gotta carry it," he said. "Not the pain, not the hate, but the truth. You carry the truth, you hear? 'Cause the world's still trying to forget." The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the porch, and the old man's voice grew softer, but his eyes burned bright, lit with the fire of things long buried. The grandson scribbled now, frantic, pages filling with names and places and wounds that still wept through time. The cicadas quieted, as if even the land was listening. Elijah spoke of forgiveness next, not as a gift he gave others, but a weapon he laid down, a burden too heavy to keep. He forgave not because they deserved it, but because he did. He wanted peace in his bones before he joined the dead. He spoke of standing at the edge of the Tallahatchie River, where the ghosts of Emmett Till and so many others walked on water, and he whispered their names over and over until the wind took them. He spoke of reconciliation, not the kind politicians shouted about, but the quiet kind, found in holding hands with those you once feared, in seeing your enemy cry and not turning away. He spoke of hope, fragile and flickering, like fireflies in a mason jar. And he kept speaking. The sky had gone from amber to indigo, and the stars blinked open like memories too long tucked away, scattered across the dark like the faces he'd once known, now lost to time and earth. Elijah's voice, steady as a slow drumbeat, kept rolling forward, pushing through the silence that had lived too long between them. His grandson barely blinked, hand cramped from writing, but he dared not stop, because each word his grandfather let loose felt like it might vanish if not caught in ink. "There was a girl," Elijah said, eyes drifting toward the horizon where the sun had died behind the trees. "Her name was Maylene. Skin the color of roasted pecans. Eyes sharp as glass. She wasn't afraid of nothing. Lord, she could cut a man down with just her voice. She used to stand on boxes in front of the church, calling out the names of every official who'd blocked us from voting, every shop owner who turned us away. They tried to silence her, but she was fire. You ever see fire try to hush?" He chuckled low, but it turned quick into a cough, then something sadder. "She loved me. I knew it even when I pretended I didn't. Thought I had to keep her away to keep her safe. Foolish, maybe. But I seen too many graves filled with love." He paused, breath catching, and when he continued, his voice was a whisper barely carried by the wind. "They came for her one night, after she led a group to register at the courthouse. Said she was inciting unrest, like hope was a crime. They beat her, boy. Beat her bad. Left her broken on her mama's steps. And when I got there, she looked up at me and smiled. Smiled. Told me, you keep going. You keep going, Eli. And I did. But God, it hurt." The grandson swallowed hard, blinking fast, the pages of his notebook fluttering like wings in the breeze, heavy with names and heartbreak. Elijah reached down and picked up a stone from the porch, rubbed it between his fingers like it held a memory, then placed it on the railing. "We used to put stones on graves," he said, "when we didn't have money for markers. Stones don't lie. They don't fade. Every time you lay one, it means someone remembered. So I carry him with me, for the ones the world forgot." He leaned back, gaze drifting skyward, eyes misty but unbroken. "Did I ever tell you about the march to Jackson?" he asked, voice lifting slightly with the memory. "It was 65. 150 of us, maybe more, walking down Highway 51. The sun beaten down, our feet blistered and bleeding, but we walked. They shouted at us from their cars. Threw bottles. Eggs. Worse. State troopers lined the roads with their batons, jaws clenched like they wanted to break something. But we kept singing. Songs our grandmamas taught us. Hymns turned into battle cries. I remember this little boy, couldn't have been more than 10, walking beside me with shoes too big and eyes too wide. He asked me, "Mister, are we gonna win?" And I told him, "We already winning just by walking dot." Elijah shook his head, a slow, tired motion that seemed to carry the weight of every mile. But not all of us made it. One girl, Celia, she collapsed in the heat. They wouldn't let us stop. Troopers said if we paused, they'd tear gas the whole line. We had to carry her. Took turns, 5 of us. Passed her like she was sacred. She never woke up. He fell silent again, the night pressing close, the trees whispering things only he could understand. "You see, son, history don't live in books," he said eventually. "It lives in scars. In the way your mama flinched when someone raised their voice. In the way your uncle never talked about his time in Vietnam, 'cause he came back to a country that still called him boy. In the way I couldn't pick up a phone for years without hearing threats on the other end." He reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out a faded photograph, edges curled, black and white bleached by time. He handed it to his grandson. It was a group photo. Dozens of faces, young and fierce, some smiling, some solemn. A protest banner sagged behind them, half legible. At the center, Elijah, unwrinkled and defiant, stood with his arm around a man whose name was long since carved into a stone in Alabama. "Every one of them had a story," he said, tapping the photo with a trembling finger. "Most didn't get to tell it. They got buried quiet. No headlines. Just dirt and grief." The grandson stared at the picture, his hands trembling, feeling like he was holding a sacred relic. Elijah leaned forward, eyes sharp now, cutting through the darkness. "You write it all down. Every damn word. Don't let him turn our pain into footnotes. Don't let him tidy up what was messy. We bled for change, not for fairy tales." A dog barked in the distance, and the wind carried the faint smell of pine and old tobacco. Elijah reached behind his chair and pulled out a small wooden box. He set it gently on the floor between them. "Open it," he said. The boy obeyed. Inside were letters, dozens, maybe hundreds, written in careful script on yellowed paper. Some were addressed to names he recognized from the stories, others to names he'd never heard, all sealed and unsent. "I wrote to the dead," Elijah said, "when I couldn't speak to the living. Every time I saw something too heavy to carry, I wrote it down and sent it to someone who'd understand. I want you to read them. Not now. Later. When you older. When you hurt and don't know why. They'll help." The boy nodded slowly, clutching the box like it was made of glass. Elijah exhaled long and deep, like he was letting go of something that had lived inside him too long. "You got the blood in you, boy. The fire. But don't let it turn to hate. That's what they want. You fight with truth. With memory. With love that won't bow its head." The moon had risen now, silvering the trees, casting shadows that danced like ghosts. Elijah closed his eyes for a moment, listening to the night, to the long, unbroken thread of history that sang beneath the earth. "You still writing?" he asked. "Good. Don't stop. 'Cause I ain't done talking dot." The wind shifted, carrying with it the low murmur of the swamp, the slow pulse of a land too soaked in sorrow to ever dry, and Elijah's voice slid back into motion like a train rolling out of a long-forgotten station, slow but unstoppable, built on iron and memory and smoke. "You ever hear of the Holloway boy?" "No, course you haven't. They made sure of that," he said, gaze narrowed to some distant fixed point just above the trees. "He was 15, played harmonica like the devil himself taught him, used to sit on the church steps every Sunday after service and play hymns till the sun dipped behind the pines. Folks said he had a gift, said it ran deeper than his blood. But that boy made the mistake of looking a white deputy in the eye one day when they crossed paths on Main Street, didn't say nothing. Didn't smile, just looked. Next morning they found his body hanging by the tracks, eyes swollen shut, mouth stuffed with mud, and that harmonica? It was shoved into his pocket like a cruel joke. He paused and breathed in slow, the weight of that silence settling over them like dust. I held his mama while she screamed till her voice was raw and her legs gave out, and the sheriff called it suicide, said the boy had been troubled, said it was a shame, but he was never right in the head. That's how they do it. Rewrite the truth right in front of you, spit lies into your mouth, and dare you to choke. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, the porch light flickering above them, like it too was growing weary of the night. That's when I started writing names, started etching 'em into notebooks, napkins, scrapwood, anything I could find, 'cause I knew someday someone tried to wash it all away, like blood in a gutter, and I couldn't let that happen. His grandson's hand never stopped moving, pen catching the cadence of grief wrapped in fire, words pouring out like Elijah's veins had opened and spilled history and ink. There was a town called Ashwood, Elijah continued. Small, barely a name on a map, but it burned in '64, whole place. Gone. They blamed it on a freak lightning storm, said it was an act of God, but I knew better, we all did. It was because they were starting to rise, organizing meetings in the school basement, reading Baldwin and Dubois, teaching the kids their worth, telling 'em they came from kings, not just cotton hands, and the night before the fire, I was there. I read a Langston Hughes poem aloud. I too, boy, I tell you, when I finished, you could feel something shift, like the air had decided to stand up with us, and that night they came with torches, real torches like out of some twisted dream, and they stood watch while it all burned, quiet, like they were warming their hands by the bones of a future they were too scared to face. His voice cracked then, but he didn't stop. I remember seeing a little girl's shoes half melted in the rubble, pink, with tiny white bows, and I ain't never been able to hold a child since without feeling her ghost hanging between us. The cicadas had quieted, even the crickets had dimmed their song, as though the world leaned in to listen, and Elijah pressed on, his voice ragged but fierce. I kept moving after that, town to town, like a shadow in the daylight, trying to stay one step ahead of the death that followed us all. I lived in safe houses, slept on floors with rats, ate stale bread in fear, but I never stopped. Lord knows I wanted to. There were nights I sat in empty churches crying to a God I wasn't even sure was still listening, asking if it was worth it, if we was really changing anything. But then I'd see a woman walk into a polling station with her baby on her hip, or a man read his name off a ballot for the first time, and it'd hit me like light through stained glass. We were changing something, even if it came slower than molasses in January. Elijah looked at the boy then, really looked, his eyes sharp. Despite the years, you ever seen someone die for nothing? He asked, and the grandson shook his head, too afraid to speak. Well, I have, more than once, and I'll tell you this, it leaves a hole in the air, like the sound of their last breath never quite settles, just lingers, floating around, looking for justice that never came. He reached into his shirt again, pulled out a crumpled envelope, and handed it over. That's from Aileen, the last letter she wrote me. I never opened it, figured if I did, it'd be real, and I wasn't ready for that, but maybe you are. His hands trembled now, not with age but with something deeper, like the earth itself was shaking through him. I lost her because I chose to fight over love, and maybe that was the right thing, maybe it wasn't, but I made peace with it, sort of. The stars above had multiplied, painting the sky with a quiet, endless grief, and Elijah looked upward, as if waiting for someone to answer. You know what they don't tell you about being a witness? He whispered. That surviving is a curse all its own. You carry the weight of those who didn't make it, not just in your memory but in your skin, in the ache in your back, in the way your hands shake when the wind sounds like a scream, and some nights you wonder if maybe it would have been easier to lie down and let the fire take you too. But then he sat back, slow and deliberate, and sighed. But I didn't, and now you're here, and that means something. The boy looked at the envelope, then back at his grandfather, and he knew in that moment that everything had changed, that he wasn't just listening to a story. He was being entrusted with a sacred inheritance, one made of ash and hope, of names written in invisible ink that only showed under the firelight of truth. Don't be gentle with the past, Elijah said suddenly, with the force of a preacher delivering his last sermon. Dig it up. Make him look. Make him listen. Make him feel what we felt. This country's built on bones and silence, and the only way forward is through the noise of what's been buried. The air thickened again, not with heat, but with reverence, the night folding it around them like a curtain drawn on a holy stage. And still he wasn't done, because history isn't made in neat chapters. It spills and bleeds and stretches far beyond where anyone expects it to, and Elijah had so much more left to say. The fireflies blinked in slow, mournful rhythm beneath the porch railing, their glow casting pale green ghosts against Elijah's withered boots as he leaned forward, hands clasped like he was holding something fragile between his palms, something invisible but too sacred to let fall. And when he spoke again, his voice had dipped into a kind of hush that wrapped around the night like a worn quilt. There was a boy named J.D. Real name was Jeremiah Davis, but nobody called him that. He was 16 with a laugh that could crack open a storm, always carried a radio on his shoulder, loved Sam Cooke and said one day he'd sing at the Apollo, but J.D. never made it past summer. They found him face down in the Tallahatchie, hands tied behind his back with barbed wire. He'd been helping us pass out flyers for the march in Greenwood, just passing out damn paper, and they beat him like he was the devil himself, strung him up, threw him in like garbage, and the sheriff told his mama that he'd probably run off, that she should be glad he didn't get into trouble. I remember her screaming on the courthouse steps, beating her fists against the bricks while the deputies smoked cigarettes and looked the other way. I remember standing there, feeling like my legs were made of sand, wanting to move, wanting to scream with her, but all I could do was bite my tongue till I tasted blood. 'Cause if I'd opened my mouth, I might have never closed it again. The night deepened as he spoke, stars thickening into constellations, the kind that old folks used to navigate fields and freedom alike, and Elijah followed that memory into the dark like he was walking barefoot over glass. We held a service for him out in the woods, near the hollow where the poplars grow crooked and the air smells like rain even in the dry months. We didn't have a preacher, just a circle of us, hands linked, breathing quiet, and I read a poem I'd scribbled on the back of a gas receipt, something about rivers and boys, and how the world don't stop tinning even when your heart does. And after we buried a little wooden cross in the dirt, we all dropped in something personal, buttons, matchbooks, coins, anything to say you mattered. And I remember thinking how funerals had become a part of the work, how we didn't just organize and march, we mourned, we grieved, and then we got back up and did it all again. His grandson's hand had gone numb from writing, but he pressed on, jaw tight, his body hunched over the notebook like it was holy writ, and Elijah saw that, nodded faintly, like a man who recognized the fire being passed down. They used to raid our meetings, he continued, his voice turning gravel thick. Bust in with flashlights and batons, scatter our papers, call us agitators. Sometimes we'd be teaching kids their alphabet when they'd kick the doors open and start yelling, drag folks out into the yard, cuff him, beat him, then say it was 'cause we were disturbing the peace, asterisk disturbing the peace asterisk, like peace was a white man's porch swing, and we were just the flies buzzing too loud. He took a deep breath, the sound of it like wind whipping through broken windows. One night, they came for me. I was sleeping on a cot in the back of the church, and they kicked the door clean off the hinges, 4 of 'em, masks on, ropes in hand, and they dragged me out behind the chapel, started asking questions in voices that didn't care about answers. One of 'em had a belt with a brass buckle that caught the moonlight just before he struck me, and I still got the mark. He lifted his shirt slowly, revealing a puckered, crooked scar that split his side like an old riverbed dried by sorrow. They left me there, said next time they'd finish it, and I lay there all night, staring up at the sky, counting stars like prayers, wondering if the ones I loved would find me in time, and they did. Sister Bernice and old Luther White, they patched me up, poured whiskey on the wounds, and read me psalms, till I passed out. His voice trembled for a second, but he gripped it tight, pulled it back into place like a flag pulled upright after a storm. I still see their faces in dreams, the ones who never made it, The ones who gave everything and got nothing in return. And sometimes I talk to him, not out loud, just in my head, askin if they'd be proud of what came after, if they think we did enough, and I never get an answer, just this feeling, like warm breath on my neck, like maybe they're waiting for the next generation to carry the rest. He turned his head slowly toward the boy, voice thinning into something sharp and tender all at once. That's you now, it's your turn, and I know it ain't fair, but justice don't come round on its own. You gotta pull it like a mule. You gotta drag it up from the dirt with blistered hands and a back full of hurt, and even then it won't come easy. He looked down at the notebook in the boy's lap, nodded at it. Them pages? They ain't just paper, they're graves, they're births, they're the truth the world's too scared to say out loud. So write it all, every ugly, holy piece of it. Don't let the pretty versions win. Thunder rumbled far off, soft and rolling like the deep laughter of the dead, and Elijah closed his eyes for a moment, like he was listening to voices that came not from earth, but from the bones beneath it. There was a man named Amos Clay, he said, barely above a whisper now. He used to lead songs at the marches, voice so deep it made grown men cry, and he'd sing a change gone come like it was carved into his chest, but they caught him one night coming out of the Union Hall and left him in a ditch, mouth full of dirt, lungs collapsed. But I remember standing at his grave and swearing I'd keep singing his song until that change did come, and I guess I've been singing ever since. A single tear slid down the old man's cheek, slow as molasses, cutting through skin like cracked leather. You keep writing, boy, he said again, the words brittle but burning. Don't stop, not till the ink runs dry and your hands give out, 'cause every word you write is a light for the one still wandering in the dark. The night had deepened into a kind of velvet stillness, the air heavy with the scent of jasmine and old wood, and Elijah's voice, though softer now, held a tension that cut through the quiet like the edge of a rusted blade, as if every word he spoke carried the weight of 1,000 unshed screams buried beneath dirt roads, and beneath courthouse floors, and beneath the black riverbeds that cradled the dead dreams of boys whose names were never written down. And he leaned forward again, the lantern beside him casting a flickering halo that danced across his face, and made the shadows seem to lean in and listen too. There was one more thing I ain't told nobody, not in all these years, he said, his fingers twitching slightly, as if brushing invisible ash from his knees. Something I kept locked in a part of me so deep, I ain't sure I could find it again if I wanted to, but maybe now is the time. And the grandson, still scribbling fast and breathless into the notebook, nodded without speaking, eyes wide and glassy, the air between them taut with reverence and sorrow. It was in '67, Elijah said, his words dropping like stones into still water. And we was in Montgomery, trying to organize a sit-in at the Woolworth's counter, same one where they'd poured hot coffee down a girl's back the week before. She was 14, name was Althea, and her scream, God, I still hear that scream sometimes when I close my eyes, like a kettle boiling over but never stopping, and that day, I was madder than I'd ever been, not just at the men who did it, but at the whole damn world, at the way it just kept on spinning like nothing had happened, like her skin wasn't blistered, like her pride wasn't peeled off in front of everybody. He shook his head slowly, the memory rising like steam from a cracked road. So we planned it, me, Ruby, Isaiah, some others. Ruby was a firecracker, hair always tied up with a red scarf, voice like thunder on a Sunday morning, and Isaiah, he was the calm one, always carried a little pocket Bible, not for preaching, just to remind himself there was something bigger than all this hate. Elijah swallowed hard, his fingers curling into fists, as if the rage still lived inside his bones. We got there early, dressed in our Sunday best, sat down at that counter and waited, didn't say nothing, didn't flinch, just waited, and when the first one spit on me, I didn't move. When the second one hit Ruby with a tray, she didn't move either, and when Isaiah took that punch to the jaw that split his lip clean through, he just looked up and whispered a verse, Blessed are the peacemakers, and I swear in that moment, I thought he was gonna die right there, but he didn't. He sat back up, blood running down his chin like paint, and he smiled, real slow, like he knew something they didn't. The night buzzed faintly with cicadas again, but even they sounded distant, like they too were hushed by the weight of the memory. They arrested us, of course, dragged us out like we was rabid dogs, and I ended up in a cell so small I couldn't stretch my legs, 4 of us packed in there, sweat and fear and piss and prayer. And that's when the warden came to me, said if I didn't shut up, if I didn't leave town, he'd make sure I disappeared like the rest. And he showed me a photo, grainy and dark, of a body hanging from a tree, said it was a warning, but I recognized the shoes. It was Franklin, another organizer from Selma. I'd just seen him the week before, Logan, about how his baby had said freedom for the first time, and now here he was, twisted and cold on glossy paper, like a trophy, and I wanted to scream, to tear the walls down, but I didn't. I just stared at that photo and thought of his little girl, and I made a promise, right there in that cell, that I'd never stop, even if it killed me, even if I lost everyone. His voice cracked, not with age, but with the sheer pressure of everything behind it, and he pressed his hand to his chest like he was holding in a storm. And I did lose people, too many, friends, brothers, the woman I loved. I told you about Maylene, but what I didn't say is she asked me to leave it all behind, begged me to come with her to Chicago, said we could start fresh, find a little apartment, maybe even have a family, but I said no, told her I couldn't abandon the cause, and she kissed me one last time and walked away without looking back, and I still dream about her some nights, sitting on a train, with her suitcase in her lap, looking out the window at a life we never got to live. Elijah paused, the silence between them swelling with ghosts. I still got her letter, but I ain't opened it, not because I'm scared of what it says, but because maybe, just maybe, if I never read it, that version of me, the one that could have gone with her, still exists somewhere. The grandson reached out then, hand resting gently on Elijah's knee, the context small but grounding, and Elijah covered it with his own. I ain't telling you this to make you sad, boy, he said softly. I'm telling you because stories are what keep the dead alive. They're what bind us to the truth when the world tries to bury it. And you got the gift, same as me, maybe better, and you gotta use it. You gotta write with the weight of every voice they tried to silence, every footstep they tried to erase. Cause if you don't, if we don't remember, they win. He gestured toward the notebook, now thick with ink and sweat. Pages curled at the edges. This right here? It's more than memory. It's resistance. It's justice with a heartbeat. The wind stirred again, lifting leaves from the yard and tossing them across the porch like scattered pages, and Elijah's eyes followed them, his mind somewhere far beyond the night. I used to believe justice was a verdict, something handed down by men in robes, but now I know it's slower than that, quieter, more like water carving through stone. It takes time, it takes pressure, but it gets there eventually. The grandson sat still, breath caught in his throat, heart pounding with a rhythm older than his own blood, and Elijah exhaled one final, heavy breath, as if preparing to hand off the weight of an entire generation, the stars above them pulsing brighter now, like witnesses, like sentinels, and though the night had grown thick and late, there was still more to tell, and Elijah, his voice barely more than gravel and breath, was not yet done. The wind had begun to hum low through the trees, a soft, mournful song like a hymn remembered half in dream, and Elijah sat still on the porch as though rooted to the wood, his eyes no longer fixed on the boy but on something far beyond, past the trees and fences, past the years and wounds, his gaze holding the horizon like he was waiting for someone long overdue. And when he spoke again, his voice had changed, quieter, yes, but not weaker, not dulled by time, instead sharpened by the long grind of living, honed into something that cut deep without ever raising its volume. That last March, he said, and the words came slowly, like they had to be pulled up from somewhere deep in his chest, was in '68, after King was shot, after Memphis, after the dream had been torn open and the blood spilled across hotel balconies and back alleys and every street corner we'd ever dared to stand on, and we walked from Selma to Montgomery again, but it felt different that time, not cause the road had changed, but cause we had 'Cause we were carrying not just hope but grief, not just signs and chants but names, so many names. His eyes flicked to the boy, and for a moment he looked impossibly young beneath the weight of his age. We were tired, baby, he said, the first time he'd used a word that tender. Tired down to the soul, and still we walked, and when we crossed that bridge, Edmund Pettus, named after a Klansman, imagine that, when we crossed it again, I heard a woman behind me say, "Don't look down," and I didn't. I kept my eyes up, right on the back of the man in front of me, because I knew if I looked down I'd see the blood that still lived in the cracks of that pavement, and I wasn't sure I could keep walking. The boy stopped writing for a moment, simply holding the pen, trembling. The air around them charged with something electric and old, like memory itself had stepped onto the porch and was listening too. And when we reached the Capitol steps, Elijah continued, his voice almost inaudible now, we sang, not loud, just soft and steady, ain't gonna let nobody turn me round. And I remember thinking, we ain't just singing for us, we singing for the ones buried in shallow graves and unnamed plots, for the ones swinging from trees and disappeared in the night, for every mother who held her child's face and whispered, "Don't run, baby, just be quiet, just stay still." And I thought maybe we were pushing something forward, even if we never got to see where it landed. Elijah leaned back then, his voice thinning like smoke, his breath uneven, chest rising in gentle, labored waves, and the grandson, tears drying against his cheeks, closed the notebook slowly, the pages so full they pulsed like a heartbeat in his hands, and for a long moment they said nothing, the silence between them thicker than any words could fill, until Elijah looked up again, and his eyes, though clouded, though rimmed with red, still held a glint of the fire that had carried him through half a century of pain and purpose. "When I go," he said, "don't bury me in no fancy place, no stone walls or white fences. I want the dirt, the real kind, where the roots twist and the worms move slow, somewhere near water, maybe under the tree where the mockingbirds sing, and no tombstone neither. Just plant something, a tree or a flower, something that grows, something that don't forget how to reach for the sun." And the boy nodded, unable to speak, the weight of legacy pressing on his chest like a hand both loving and heavy, and Elijah reached out, laid his hand on the boy's shoulder, his skin papery but firm. "You got the story now," he said. "Not just mine, but all of them, and you gotta tell it true. Not the neat version they put in textbooks, not the kind they dress up in museums, but the raw one, the one that hurts, the one that bleeds, 'cause that's the one that sets people free." And just then, from the corner of the yard, a mockingbird let out a long, wavering cry, like it too had heard enough silence for one night, and the boy looked out into the dark, into the future stretching before him, and felt not fear but a calling, not a burden but a promise. And as Elijah closed his eyes, his breath shallow but steady, the boy opened the notebook again, turned to a fresh page, and began to write, not because the story was ending, but because it was his turn to begin.